The scream that echoed through the research station's corridors was unlike anything Dr. Alex Rivers had ever heard. It was part roar, part howl, and entirely alien. The sound made the metal walls vibrate and sent most of the station's crew scrambling for safety. Alex grabbed the emergency kit and ran toward the source of the noise. The cargo bay was a mess. Crates had been scattered like toys, and deep claw marks scarred the floor. In the center of the chaos stood a creature that made Alex's breath catch. The Corthony was massive, easily 8 feet tall at the shoulder, with midnight black fur that seemed to absorb light. Its 6 legs ended in claws that could slice through steel, and its twin tails lashed the air with deadly precision. This was Darkfang, one of the most feared hunters in known space, but Darkfang wasn't attacking. The creature was pacing frantically around 3 small bundles of fur huddled in the corner. The cubs were no bigger than house cats, their eyes barely open, mewing pitifully. Alex realized what had happened. During the territorial fight that had raged across the moon's surface for 3 days, Darkfang had hidden its young in the station's cargo bay. Now something had gone wrong. The massive predator noticed Alex and let out a warning growl that would have sent most beings running. Instead, Alex slowly knelt down and set the emergency kit aside. The cubs were clearly in distress, and from their weak cries, they hadn't eaten in hours. Alex had spent years studying alien biology, and maternal desperation looked the same across species. "Easy there," Alex said softly. "I'm here to help." Darkfang's growl deepened, but the creature stepped back slightly. Alex moved closer to the cubs, noting their pale gums and shallow breathing. Dehydration and hunger were killing them. The emergency kit contained basic medical supplies, but nothing designed for Corthony physiology. Alex would have to improvise. The first cub was the smallest, its black fur marked with patches of silver. Alex gently lifted it, feeling how light it was. Too light. The cub's body temperature was dropping, a dangerous sign in any mammalian species. Alex tucked the cub inside a jacket, using body heat to warm it while preparing a nutrient solution. From the kit's supplies, Darkfang watched every movement with intense focus. The creature's eyes, a startling amber color, tracked Alex's hands as they worked. When Alex began feeding the first cub with an improvised bottle, Darkfang took another step back. The cub latched onto the bottle eagerly, its tiny claws gripping. Alex's fingers, the second cub was larger, with pure white fur that seemed to glow in the cargo bay's dim lighting. This one was more active, trying to crawl toward its parent despite its weakness. Alex repeated the feeding process, noting how the cub's purring vibrated against human hands. Corthony weren't supposed to purr, according to every xenobiological text Alex had read. The third cub had reddish fur with dark stripes. It was the most aggressive of the 3, hissing and trying to bite when Alex approached. But hunger won over instinct, and soon it too was feeding from the makeshift bottle. Alex worked methodically, checking each cub's vital signs and adjusting the nutrient mixture based on their responses. Hours passed. Darkfang gradually moved closer, drawn by the sight of its cubs growing stronger. The massive predator's agitation decreased as the cub's cries changed from distressed mewing to contented chirping. Alex continued the feeding routine, warming the cubs when they grew cold and cleaning them when necessary. The breakthrough came when the smallest cub, now warm and fed, crawled from Alex's lap toward its parent. Darkfang lowered its great head, nuzzling the tiny creature with surprising gentleness. The cub responded by purring louder, a sound that seemed to relax the adult Korthan. Alex slowly offered the nutrient bottle to Darkfang, demonstrating how to hold it. The creature's claws were designed for killing, not delicate work, but it managed to grip the bottle carefully. Watching the feared Warbeast tenderly feed its young was a sight that would stay with Alex forever. As dawn approached, bringing the artificial lighting cycle that mimicked the moon's rotation, Darkfang made a decision that surprised everyone. Instead of gathering the cubs and leaving, the creature settled down in the cargo bay, arranging its body in a protective circle around the young. It looked directly at Alex and made a soft rumbling sound that might have been gratitude. The cubs, now strong enough to move freely, began exploring their small world. They investigated Alex's boots, chewed on the empty bottles, and playfully wrestled with each other. Normal behavior for healthy young mammals, but revolutionary for Courtney. These cubs should have been silent, aggressive, and suspicious of everything. Instead, they seemed curious and trusting. Alex spent the next day observing and caring for the family. The cubs responded well to gentle handling, and their natural aggression seemed muted by their early experience with human kindness. They learned to associate Alex's voice with food and comfort, coming when called and settling down when spoken to softly. The most remarkable moment came when station alarms announced another territorial fight approaching. Darkfang's pack was returning, along with their rivals. The adult Courtney faced a choice: take the cubs into battle where they might be killed, or leave them in the safety of the station. Darkfang looked at Alex for a long moment, then at the cubs playing peacefully in their makeshift nest. The creature moved to each cub, nuzzling them and making soft sounds that Alex recognized as parental communication. Then, in an unprecedented act of trust, Darkfang headed for the cargo bay door. The massive predator paused at the threshold, turning back one final time. Its amber eyes met Alex's, and in that gaze was an unmistakable message: protect them. Then Darkfang was gone, leaving behind 3 cubs and a human who had no idea that this moment would change both species forever. The cubs seemed to understand their parent had left on important business. They settled closer to Alex, seeking the warmth and security that human presence provided. As the sounds of distant battle echoed across the moon's surface, Alex made a promise to the tiny creatures. They would be safe, they would be loved, and they would grow up knowing kindness as strength. 3 weeks had passed since Darkfang left the cubs in Alex's care, and the research station had transformed into something resembling a nursery. The smallest cub, which Alex had named Ember for its silver-touched fur, had claimed the warmest corner near the heating units. Frost, the white cub, preferred the observation deck where starlight filtered through the reinforced windows. Shadow, the striped one with the fierce temperament, had made a nest in Alex's personal quarters and refused to sleep anywhere else. The changes in the cubs went far beyond simple growth. They had doubled in size and their coordination had improved dramatically, but it was their behavior that amazed everyone on the station. Courtney cubs were supposed to be solitary, aggressive, and constantly competing for resources. These 3 did the opposite of everything in the textbooks. Dr. Lisa Park from the biology department watched in fascination as the cubs shared their food. Alex had prepared 3 separate portions, but Ember pushed half of her meal toward Shadow, who had been slower to eat that morning. Shadow reciprocated by grooming Ember's fur, removing tangles that the smaller cub couldn't reach. Meanwhile, Frost had discovered that the station's maintenance drones made interesting sounds when touched gently, and was teaching the others to sing along with the mechanical humming. "This is impossible," Dr. Park whispered to Alex. "Courtney don't share, they don't groom each other outside of mating pairs, and they certainly don't make music." Alex knelt beside the cubs, who immediately crowded around for attention. Their purring filled the room with a sound like distant thunder. "Maybe they just needed someone to show them a different way," Alex replied, scratching behind Frost's ears. The white cub leaned into the touch, eyes closing in contentment. The breakthrough with communication came during the 4th week. Alex had been talking to the cubs constantly, explaining daily routines and describing everything that was happening around them. Most xenobiologists believed that Courtney communication was limited to basic hunting calls and territorial warnings. The cubs proved that theory wrong. "Alex," Ember said one morning, the words slightly distorted by her alien vocal cords, but unmistakably clear. The entire research team gathered to witness as the cubs began attempting human speech. Their progress was rapid and astonishing. Within days, they had learned dozens of words and were forming simple sentences. Shadow's first complete phrase was, "Shadow hungry please," while Frost preferred to ask, "What that?" About everything in their environment. The cubs' intelligence became more apparent as they solved problems that adult Courtney struggled with. When maintenance drones got stuck in narrow spaces, the cubs learned to work together, with one providing light from a portable lamp while another guided the trapped machine to safety. They began showing empathy not just to each other, but to every living thing on the station. The incident with the injured bird changed everything. A small creature had somehow gotten into the station and broken its wing flying into a window. Station protocol called for either releasing it back outside or humanely ending its suffering. The cubs had other ideas. Ember gently carried the bird to Alex, making soft crooning sounds that seemed designed to calm the frightened animal. Shadow brought strips of soft fabric from their bedding, somehow understanding that the wing needed support. Frost stood guard, ensuring no one disturbed the makeshift medical procedure. Together, they had performed their first act of interspecies compassion. Word of the cubs' remarkable development spread beyond the research station. The Hegemony Council, which governed relations between the various species in known space, sent a formal inquiry. Other Corthony packs demanded to know what humans had done to the cubs. Some accused Alex of using drugs or genetic manipulation to alter their natural behavior. The accusations stung, but Alex had detailed records of every interaction with the cubs. No chemicals had been used, no genetic modifications attempted. The only treatment the cubs had received was consistent care, patient teaching, and unconditional affection. The same things human children needed to thrive. Ambassador Quinn, a representative from the bird-like Avarice species, arrived to conduct an official investigation. The Avarice were known for their strict adherence to natural law and their suspicion of any attempt to alter species behavior. Quinn expected to find evidence of human manipulation. Instead, the ambassador found 3 young Corthony who greeted visitors with curiosity rather than aggression, who solved complex puzzles through cooperation, and who had learned to express themselves in multiple languages. When Quinn accidentally dropped a data pad, all 3 cubs rushed to help retrieve it, with Ember carefully picking up the scattered components while Shadow and Frost checked to make sure the ambassador wasn't hurt. "In 3 centuries of diplomatic service," Quinn said to Alex later, "I have never seen young Corthony behave with such consideration for others. What did you do to them?" "I treated them like children instead of weapons," Alex replied simply. The cubs had learned other human behaviors that puzzled their observers. They played games that required taking turns and following rules. They comforted each other during thunderstorms, with the braver cubs staying close to those who were frightened. They had even begun creating art, using their claws to carve patterns in soft materials and arranging colorful objects in pleasing designs. Most remarkably, they had developed a sense of justice that went beyond pack loyalty. When Shadow accidentally broke Frost's favorite toy, he immediately offered his own as compensation. When Ember found extra food treats, she divided them equally rather than keeping them for herself. These weren't trained responses, but genuine expressions of fairness and empathy. The research team documented every development, knowing they were witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. The cubs weren't just learning human behaviors, they were integrating them with their natural Corthony abilities to become something entirely new. They retained their strength, speed, and hunting instincts, but tempered these traits with compassion and cooperation. As the weeks passed, Alex began to understand that the cubs represented more than just successful cross-species childcare. They were proof that nurture could enhance nature, that love and patience could unlock potential that aggression and competition kept hidden. The cubs weren't weakened by their gentle upbringing, they were strengthened by it. The transformation was so complete that when station sensors detected approaching Corthony ships, Alex felt a moment of fear. Darkfang was returning, along with the pack. How would the cubs react to seeing their birth parent again? More importantly, how would Darkfang react to what the cubs had become? The cubs sensed the approaching ships too, their enhanced hearing picking up engine sounds long before human equipment detected them. But instead of excitement or fear, they showed something that would have been impossible for traditionally raised Corthony young. They asked Alex what would happen next, seeking reassurance and guidance from their human guardian. In that moment, Alex realized that no matter what the pack decided, these 3 cubs would never be quite the same as their wild cousins again. The docking bay doors groaned open with mechanical precision, revealing 5 massive shapes silhouetted against the starfield. Darkfang entered first, moving with the deadly grace that made Corthony the most feared predators in known space. Behind came 4 other pack members, each one a living weapon honed by generations of warfare and survival. Alex stood with the 3 cubs in the observation area above the docking bay, watching their reunion unfold. Ember, Frost, and Shadow pressed against the reinforced glass, their enhanced eyesight easily picking out their birth parent among the group. Their reaction surprised everyone present. Instead of the excited rushing and aggressive displays typical of young Corthony, the cubs remained calm and looked to Alex for guidance. "Alex go with cubs?" Ember asked, her speech now clear despite the alien accent. "Pack look angry." The pack did look angry. Alex could see it in their posture, the way their tails lashed and their ears flattened against their skulls. These were not creatures coming to collect beloved offspring. These were warriors who suspected their young had been corrupted by alien influence. Darkfang's head turned upward, amber eyes finding the observation window. For a long moment, parent and cubs stared at each other across the space between them. Then Darkfang made a sound that Alex had never heard before, a complex call that seemed to contain questions and commands mixed together. The cubs responded immediately, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of answering with traditional Corthony vocalizations, they began to speak in the multi-species trade language they had learned from the research team. "Hello, birth parent," Shadow called out. "Shadow, happy to see you safe?" The effect on the pack was immediate and dramatic. The 4 warriors behind Darkfang snarled and took aggressive stances, clearly disturbed by hearing cubs speak in alien tongues. One of them, a scarred veteran with missing claws, barked something that needed no translation. The cubs were speaking like prey species, not predators. Darkfang's response was more measured but equally concerned. The great creature moved closer to the observation window, studying its offspring with growing bewilderment. These cubs were larger and healthier than when it had left them, but something fundamental had changed. They stood close together instead of spacing themselves for combat readiness. They looked to the human for comfort instead of asserting independence. Most disturbing of all, they showed no fear of the pack's obvious disapproval. Dr. Park activated the communication system, allowing the groups to speak directly. "The cubs are well cared for," she announced. "They've grown strong and learned many new skills." The scarred pack member, who Alex learned was called Razorclaw, responded with a roar of fury. "You have made them weak. Corthony cubs must be fierce, not friendly. You have stolen their warrior spirits." Alex stepped forward, placing protective hands on the cubs' shoulders. "We haven't stolen anything. We've helped them discover abilities." "They always had." "Lies," another pack member snarled. "Corthony do not speak prey languages. Corthony do not show softness to strangers. You have poisoned their minds with weakness." The argument escalated quickly, with pack members demanding immediate return of the cubs and threatening violence if humans had damaged them. The research station's security team prepared for the worst, knowing that even one adult Corthony could tear through their defenses. But the cubs themselves provided the most shocking intervention. "Stop fighting," Frost said, his voice carrying clearly through the communication system. "Fighting hurts everyone. Talk with words, not claws." The docking bay fell silent. In Corthony culture, cubs never told adults to stop fighting. Cubs were expected to watch and learn from displays of dominance and aggression. The pack stared in disbelief as the white cub continued speaking. "We still strong," Frost explained. "Still fast, still smart. But now we know other things too. Know how to help friends. Know how to make others happy. Know how to solve problems without hurting." Razorclaw's response was swift and brutal. "Soft thoughts lead to soft claws. Weakness spreads like disease. These cubs must be retrained before they infect others." The pack began moving toward the observation deck, intent on retrieving the cubs by force. Alex prepared to defend them, knowing it was hopeless against adult Corthony. But Darkfang stepped into their path, blocking the way with its massive body. "What?" Followed was a confrontation that shook the foundations of Korthony society. Darkfang, despite its own confusion about the cubs' changes, would not allow the pack to harm them. The standoff grew more tense as other pack members argued that Darkfang had been corrupted by human influence as well. The crisis deepened when the cubs made their choice clear. Given the opportunity to return immediately to their pack, they refused. Shadow spoke for all three when he said, "Want to stay with Alex. Alex teaches good things. Pack only teaches hurting." This rejection of pack authority was unprecedented in Korthony history. Young Korthony had never been given choices about their upbringing, and none had ever rejected their birth culture in favor of alien values. The pack saw this as proof that the cubs had been irreversibly damaged by human contact. Razorclaw demanded combat trials to prove the cubs' unworthiness. If they could not demonstrate proper Korthony aggression and competitiveness, they would be declared outcasts and abandoned. It was a death sentence disguised as tradition. Alex protested, but galactic law gave species the right to determine their own cultural practices. The Hegemony Council could not interfere in internal Korthony matters, no matter how brutal they seemed to human sensibilities. The cubs would face trials designed to test their warrior instincts, trials that traditionally raised cubs barely survived. But as the pack prepared their tests, they failed to notice something important. Darkfang had been watching its offspring carefully throughout the confrontation, observing not just their words but their behavior. The great predator saw how the cubs supported each other emotionally, how they remained calm under pressure, and how they showed concern for everyone present, including pack members who threatened them most significantly. Darkfang noticed that the cubs' apparent softness didn't make them weak. They moved with fluid coordination, their senses were sharp and alert, and their intelligence far exceeded what was typical for their age. They had gained something valuable without losing their essential Korthony nature. As the pack departed to prepare the trials, Darkfang remained behind. The conversation between parent and offspring was conducted in a mixture of traditional Korthony calls and the new language skills the cubs had learned. Alex couldn't understand all of it, but the emotional content was clear. Darkfang was asking questions, trying to understand what had happened to create these remarkable young creatures. The cubs answered honestly, describing their life with Alex, their games and lessons, their growing friendships with other species on the station. They showed their parent the art they had created, demonstrated their problem-solving abilities, and most importantly, expressed their love for both their birth parent and their human guardian. That night, as the pack prepared trials designed to break the cubs' unnatural gentleness, Darkfang made a decision that would reshape both species' future. The great predator had seen enough to know that its offspring weren't weakened by their human upbringing. They were enhanced by it, possessing all their natural abilities plus emotional and intellectual gifts that traditional Korthony lacked. The trials would proceed as demanded, but Darkfang would be watching with new eyes, ready to protect cubs who had already proven they were stronger than any pack member realized. The testing ground stretched across the station's largest cargo hold, transformed into an arena that would determine the cubs' fate. Representatives from 12 different species had arrived to witness what many called the most important trial in galactic history. The Hegemony Council had declared the proceedings official, lending weight to whatever decision emerged from the ancient Korthony traditions. Ambassador Quinn stood beside Alex in the observation gallery, both watching as pack members arranged obstacles and challenges throughout the space below. The tests would measure everything from hunting ability to combat reflexes, but Alex knew the real purpose was to prove that gentleness had made the cubs unfit for Korthony society. The traditional cubs arrived this morning, Quinn informed Alex. Quietly, 3 young Korthony raised according to strict pack protocols. They will serve as the comparison standard. Alex had seen the traditional cubs briefly as they were brought aboard. They moved in rigid formation, never touching or acknowledging each other except to establish dominance. Their eyes held the cold calculation that Korthony were famous for, sizing up every potential threat and advantage. They were everything that Ember, Frost, and Shadow were not. The testing began with individual hunting simulations. Holographic prey animals darted through obstacle courses while the cubs gave chase. The traditional cubs performed exactly as expected, using overwhelming speed and aggression to bring down their targets efficiently. They showed no hesitation, no mercy, and no cooperation with each other. Ember went first for Alex's group, her silver-touched fur gleaming under the arena lights. She approached the simulation differently, studying the prey patterns and terrain features before beginning her hunt. When she finally moved, it was with precision rather than brute force. She anticipated the holographic animal's escape routes and intercepted it with minimal effort. Conserving energy while achieving the same result, the pack members growled disapproval. Efficiency wasn't the point, they argued. Courtney cubs should attack with overwhelming ferocity to develop proper warrior instincts. Ember's calculated approach suggested dangerous softness. Frost's turn came next, and the white cub surprised everyone by attempting to hurt his prey rather than kill it. The simulation wasn't designed for such tactics, but Frost adapted quickly, using the terrain to guide the holographic animal into a corner where capture became inevitable. His success rate matched the traditional cubs, but his methods were completely alien to Courtney thinking. Shadow faced the most aggressive simulation, designed to test reaction speed against multiple attackers. The traditional cubs had tackled this challenge by going into berserker fury, slashing at everything that moved. Shadow took a different approach, using defensive positioning and strategic retreats to separate the targets before engaging them individually. His solution was more sophisticated and ultimately more effective. Razorclaw snarled at each non-traditional performance. These cubs think too much, warriors act on instinct. All this calculation will get them killed in real combat. The second phase tested survival skills in a hostile environment simulation. Traditional cubs were expected to endure hardship alone, proving their individual strength. The three traditional cubs entered separate chambers filled with obstacles, predators, and resource scarcity. They performed admirably, showcasing the resilience that made their species legendary, but when Alex's cubs faced the same challenge, they immediately began working together despite being in separate chambers. Using the communication skills they had learned, they coordinated their efforts across the different environments. Ember found water sources and shared the information with her siblings. Frost discovered safe shelter and guided the others to similar locations. Shadow identified which plants were safe to eat and taught the others to recognize them. The result was unprecedented. While traditional cubs struggled through their trials individually, Alex's cubs not only survived, but thrived by supporting each other. They completed their challenges faster and with less stress than their traditionally raised counterparts. Dr. Park recorded everything, knowing that the galaxy was witnessing the birth of a new approach to child-rearing. But the pack members were growing more agitated with each non-traditional success. This wasn't how Courtney were supposed to behave. The third phase brought combat trials, testing the cubs' fighting abilities against mechanical opponents. The traditional cubs approached this with the savage enthusiasm their species was known for, attacking relentlessly until their opponents were destroyed. They scored well on damage dealing and showed no fear of injury. Alex's cubs approached combat differently. They assessed their opponents' weaknesses, used teamwork to overcome superior numbers, and showed mercy when their mechanical enemies were disabled but not destroyed. Their combat effectiveness was equal to the traditional cubs, but their restraint troubled the pack elders. Warriors show no mercy. Razorclaw declared, "These cubs hesitate to kill. They will die because they are too soft to finish their enemies." The fourth phase tested problem-solving abilities with increasingly complex puzzles. Traditional cubs were expected to solve challenges through persistence and individual effort. The test chambers contained mechanical devices that required specific sequences of actions to unlock rewards. The traditional cubs attacked the puzzles with the same ferocity they brought to everything else. They eventually succeeded through trial and error, but their approach was inefficient and stressful. One traditional cub became so frustrated that it damaged the testing equipment in its rage. Alex's cubs approached the puzzles as a team challenge. They shared observations, tested theories together, and built on each other's discoveries. Their solutions were elegant and swift, demonstrating not just intelligence, but the kind of collaborative thinking that no Corthony had ever shown before. The final phase brought the most controversial test of all. The cubs were presented with injured creatures from various species and given the choice to help or ignore them. Traditional Corthony teaching said that showing concern for non-pack members was weakness that could be exploited by enemies. The traditional cubs performed as expected, ignoring the injured creatures or viewing them as potential prey. Their indifference to suffering was seen as proper Corthony behavior by the pack elders. Alex's cubs immediately rushed to help every injured creature they encountered. They used their first aid training to stabilize wounds, provide comfort to frightened animals, and even shared their own food with hungry creatures. Their compassion was complete and instinctive. This final display proved too much for several pack members. They declared the trials corrupted and demanded that Alex's cubs be rejected immediately. The cubs had failed to show proper Corthony ruthlessness, and were therefore unfit for pack society, but as the arguments raged, something unexpected happened. One of the traditional cubs, injured during the combat trials, collapsed from blood loss. The pack members stepped back, following ancient customs that said wounded cubs must prove their strength by recovering alone or die trying. Alex's cubs acted instantly. Despite the prohibition against helping, they surrounded their injured cousin and began applying the medical techniques Alex had taught them. Ember stopped the bleeding while Frost provided warmth and Shadow called for human medical assistance. The injured cub survived because of their intervention. More importantly, it experienced kindness from Corthony siblings for the first time in its life. The emotional impact was visible as the traditional cub looked at its rescuers with something approaching wonder. Darkfang had watched every trial in silence, observing both groups of cubs with growing understanding. As the pack argued about the test results, the great predator finally spoke. Its words would determine not just the fate of 3 cubs, but the future relationship between humans and Corthony throughout the galaxy. The cubs have passed every test, Darkfang declared. They hunt successfully, survive challenges, fight effectively, solve problems, and show courage. But they have gained something more. They have learned to make others stronger instead of weaker. This is not corruption, this is evolution. The silence that followed Darkfang's declaration stretched across the arena like a physical presence. Pack members stared at their leader with expressions ranging from confusion to outright rebellion. In 3,000 years of Corthony history, no pack leader had ever suggested that traditional ways might be improved upon. Razorclaw stepped forward, his scarred body radiating challenge. You speak madness, Darkfang. These cubs are weak, corrupted by alien thinking. They will bring doom to any pack that accepts them. Other pack members voiced their agreement, but their protests died as Darkfang moved with lightning speed. The great predator's claws stopped inches from Razorclaw's throat, demonstrating the killing power that had made Darkfang legendary throughout the galaxy. The message was clear: challenge the cubs if you must, but do not challenge their parents. Judgment. Alex watched from the observation deck as the confrontation unfolded, knowing that everything hinged on what happened next. The cubs stood together in the arena below, instinctively protecting each other while their fate was decided by forces beyond their control. Ambassador. Quinn leaned closer to Alex. Darkfang faces an impossible choice. Accept the pack's judgment and lose the cubs, or defend them and risk being cast out entirely. No Corthony has ever survived separation from pack society. But Darkfang had seen something during the trials that the other pack members missed. The cubs weren't just performing. Well, despite their human upbringing, they were excelling because of it. Their combination of traditional Corthony abilities with human-taught empathy and cooperation made them formidable in ways the pack couldn't comprehend. I have made my decision, Darkfang announced, backing away from Razorclaw but maintaining an authoritative stance. These cubs will remain with the human Alex. They will continue learning both Corthony and human ways. Any pack member who disagrees may challenge me directly. The response was immediate and violent. 2 pack members accepted the challenge, believing that Darkfang had been weakened by contact with humans. The combat that followed was brief but decisive. Darkfang's skills had not diminished, and the challengers quickly found themselves defeated and humiliated, but the victory came at a cost. By choosing the cubs over pack unity, Darkfang had violated one of the most sacred Korthani traditions. Razorclaw, speaking for the remaining pack members, formally expelled Darkfang from pack society. The great predator was now an outcast, forbiddance. From returning to Korthani space, the cubs watched their birth parent sacrifice everything for them, and their response revealed just how much they had changed. Instead of accepting this as natural hierarchy, they immediately tried to comfort Darkfang, pressing close and offering the emotional support that traditional Korthani cubs would never think to provide. "Not alone," Ember said, nuzzling against Darkfang's massive head. "Have cubs, have Alex, have new family." The concept of chosen family over birth pack was revolutionary in Korthani thinking, but as the cubs demonstrated their love and loyalty to both their birth parent and human guardian, something unprecedented happened. The injured traditional cub, still recovering from wounds that Alex's cubs had helped heal, approached the group, hesitantly. "Want to learn new ways too?" the traditional cub said, its voice barely above a whisper. "Want to know how to help instead of hurt." Razorclaw roared in fury, but the cub's declaration had been heard by the Hegemony Council representatives. The young Korthani was requesting asylum, asking to be removed from pack authority and placed under human care. It was the first time in galactic history that a Korthani had voluntarily left its birth culture. Over the following days, more young Korthani began arriving at the research station. Word had spread through subspace communications about cubs who had learned to combine strength with compassion. Parents who had lost cubs to pack violence brought their surviving offspring, hoping for a different future. Pregnant Korthani sought sanctuary, wanting their unborn cubs to have choices their own generation never had. The pack elders declared the exodus a plague of weakness that would destroy Korthani civilization. But they couldn't stop the steady stream of refugees seeking a new way of life. Within a month, the research station had been expanded to accommodate dozens of Korthani families who had chosen human guidance over traditional pack structure. Alex found the responsibility overwhelming and wonderful in equal measure. Each new cub presented unique challenges and opportunities. Some adapted quickly to the gentler approach, while others needed time to unlearn aggressive responses. But all of them showed the same potential that Ember, Frost, and Shadow had demonstrated, the ability to be both strong and kind. The breakthrough came when Dr. Park proposed establishing the first interspecies nursery in galactic history. The facility would care for young from multiple races, allowing them to learn from each other while preserving their unique cultural strengths. The Hegemony Council approved the project after seeing the remarkable development of the Korthani. Cubs. Representatives from the peaceful Delari brought their crystalline offspring, creatures of pure logic who had never experienced emotional warmth. The plant-like Verdani contributed their seedlings, beings who understood cooperation but had never learned individual identity. Even the machine intelligence called the Synthesis sent their newly activated drones to participate in the unprecedented experiment. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. Young Delari learned to balance logic with empathy by playing with Korthani cubs who had mastered both. Verdani seedlings developed individual personalities while teaching their classmates about perfect cooperation. Synthesis drones discovered creativity and imagination through interactions with biological beings who thought in ways their programming had never considered. Alex served as the primary coordinator, but the real teachers were the children themselves. They approached differences without prejudice, finding common ground in play and shared curiosity about the universe around them. Language barriers dissolved, as they created their own communication methods that combined elements from every species present. Darkfang took on the role of protector and assistant teacher, learning alongside the cubs while maintaining security for the growing facility. The great predator's transformation was as remarkable as that of the young ones. Daily exposure to different species and their unique perspectives had opened Darkfang's mind to possibilities that pack isolation had never allowed. The most dramatic change came in the traditional Courtney cub who had first requested asylum. Now called Bright by the others, the young predator had become a bridge between old and new ways. Bright could speak the formal pack language when dealing with Courtney visitors, but also knew the gentle approaches that made other species feel safe and welcome. 6 months after the trials, the first generation of interspecies raised youngsters was ready for evaluation. The Hegemony Council sent observers from every member species to assess whether the experiment had succeeded or created dangerous hybrids of conflicting cultures. What they found astonished them. The young beings retained all their species-specific abilities while gaining unprecedented cross-cultural understanding. Courtney cubs could hunt with traditional efficiency but chose cooperation over competition. Delari offspring balanced logic with emotional intelligence that their pure logic elders envied. Verdani seedlings showed individual creativity while maintaining their species' natural harmony. Most importantly, the interspecies children had developed something entirely new: the ability to see challenges from multiple perspectives simultaneously. When presented with complex problems, they naturally formed mixed species teams that combined different cognitive approaches for optimal solutions. The success led to requests from across the galaxy. Species that had been enemies for centuries sent delegations to observe how their children played together peacefully. Governments that had never trusted each other began negotiating treaties based on what their youngsters had accomplished through simple friendship. Alex stood on the observation deck one evening, watching the children play in the expanded nursery below. Ember, now nearly adult-sized, was teaching a group of mixed-species youngsters to climb the artificial trees that had been installed for their exercise. Frost was leading a music session where crystalline chimes from young Delary harmonized with the purring of Courtney cubs and the rustling songs of Verdani seedlings. Shadow had organized a storytelling circle where each species contributed myths and legends from their homeworlds. Darkfang approached quietly, the great predators, footsteps barely audible despite its massive size. "You have created something that will change the galaxy forever," Darkfang said, settling beside Alex to watch their children together. "We all created it," Alex replied. "The children did most of the work. They showed us that differences don't have to mean division." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion from the play area. A new arrival, a young Courtney from one of the most traditional packs, had just been brought to the facility by desperate parents. The cub was terrified, aggressive, and convinced that every non-Courtney was an enemy to be destroyed. Alex and Darkfang watched as Ember approached the frightened newcomer slowly, speaking in gentle Courtney while maintaining a respectful distance. Gradually, other children joined her, forming a welcoming circle that offered friendship without demanding anything in return. The terrified cub's snarls gradually quieted as it realized that no one intended harm. "How long before this one learns to play with the others?" Darkfang asked. Alex smiled, remembering another frightened cub who had arrived months earlier in almost identical circumstances. "Give it a week. Children are remarkably good teachers when adults get out of their way." The nursery had become more than an educational facility. It was a symbol of what the galaxy could become when different. Species chose cooperation over conflict, understanding over fear, and love over tradition-bound hatred. The children raised there would grow up to be leaders, scientists, diplomats, and explorers who saw diversity as strength rather than threat. As the artificial night cycle dimmed the lights and the children settled into their multi-species sleeping groups, Alex reflected on how far they had all come. It had started with 3 abandoned cubs and a human who simply refused to let them die. Now it was a movement that was reshaping galactic civilization. The future belonged to children who had learned that being strong meant protecting others, that being smart meant helping everyone succeed, and that being brave meant choosing kindness even when it seemed dangerous. They would inherit a universe full of wonders, and they would explore it together as family rather than as strangers.